The Great Pyramid, secrets we still can't explain. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It truly helps the channel grow and continue to create contents like this. Do you ever notice how the Great Pyramid is one of those things we all think we understand until you actually look at it for more than 5 seconds? It's like this cultural assumption we all grow up with. Oh yeah, the Egyptians built that. Took a bunch of workers. Rolled some stones, boom, done. And then as an adult, you start digging into the details, and suddenly you're sitting there at 2 in the morning, staring at diagrams and measurements, realizing, hold on, this thing is borderline impossible. And that's where this whole rabbit hole starts. Because the deeper you go, the more the Great Pyramid stops feeling like just a tomb and starts feeling like some kind of ancient engineering flex that still makes modern builders sweat. The thing is enormous, built with a precision that's almost absurd, and it sits there as if it's daring us to figure out how the hell people pulled this off 4,500 years ago. And every time we think we've solved the puzzle, the pyramid just turns around and says, "Cute theory, try again." Let's start with the basics. The scale. People throw numbers around, but it's hard to appreciate them. This thing originally stood at about 481 feet tall, almost the height of a 45-story building. Over 2 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as a small truck, others weighing as much as a train locomotive. And all of this was done without steel tools, without wheels, without cranes, without diesel engines humming in the background. Just manpower, simple tools, and what seems like a ridiculous level of coordination. But then you look at the foundation, and this is where it gets wild. The base of the pyramid is almost perfectly level, not pretty flat, not good enough for the ancient world. I'm talking about so level that if you flooded the base with water, the difference in height would be about the thickness of your thumbnail. We don't even get sidewalks that level today. And this is the part that starts to crack open your curiosity, because you say, all right, maybe they were really good stonemasons. Sure, but then the questions snowball. For example, why is the Great Pyramid aligned almost perfectly to true north? Not magnetic north, true north, the actual rotational axis of the Earth. And it's so precise that the margin of error is just a fraction of a degree. You have modern buildings made with lasers and satellites that aren't aligned this well. And somehow the ancient Egyptians did this with, what? Shadows? Stars? A piece of string? Maybe, but even if you give them that, the next mystery hits you right in the face. The sheer geometry of the place. The pyramid's dimensions encode mathematical relationships, pi, phi, proportions of the Earth's circumference. And maybe that's coincidental. Maybe we're just pattern-hungry animals seeing significance where there's none. But then you walk inside, and the coincidences start piling up so fast you can't keep up. Let's talk about the interior, because this is where the whole thing starts feeling less like a tomb and more like some kind of engineered machine. First off, there are no hieroglyphs inside the main chambers. None. The Egyptians loved writing on walls. They wrote on everything. Coffins, temples, boats, random household objects. Yet the Great Pyramid, their supposed greatest tomb, has no inscriptions inside the heart of it. That's like building the world's most extravagant mansion and not hanging a single painting. Then you get to the layout, the descending passage, the ascending passage, the grand gallery. These things aren't decorated, they're engineered. The angles are precise. The blocks are massive. The surfaces are straight in a way that makes you wonder how they even did it in those narrow corridors with no room to swing a tool. And the king's chamber, this is the part that still blows my mind, is built out of gigantic granite blocks transported from hundreds of miles away. Not little pieces. We're talking multi-ton slabs that were somehow lifted and placed dozens of feet above the ground inside this structure that was still being built. And then there's the ceiling of the king's chamber. Instead of making a flat roof, the builders stacked 5 layers of massive granite beams above it, forming what are called relieving chambers. It's like someone knew exactly how much weight the chamber would bear and engineered a fail-safe system to prevent collapse. That's not a tomb. That's someone thinking in terms of structural stress and load distribution. But here's where I always stop and sit back for a minute. The precision of the stonework itself. People imagine rough blocks stacked on each other, No, these stones fit so tight you couldn't slide a credit card between them. Interior surfaces nobody was meant to see, are finished with a level of care you'd expect in a machine shop, not a ceremonial monument, not for royalty, not for gods, for function. It feels like it was built to do something specific. And sure, the mainstream explanation is that the pyramid was a tomb for Khufu, but that story has cracks all over it. First, no mummy was ever found inside, and I get it, maybe it was looted. But here's the thing, the sarcophagus, this granite box in the king's chamber, is too big to fit through the passageways. That means it had to be put there while the pyramid was being built, and it's unfinished. It looks like a rejected prototype. No inscriptions, no carvings, nothing. Does that sound like a pharaoh's royal burial? A guy who was basically considered the living embodiment of a god? They engraved their toothbrush handles, but not the most important coffin in the kingdom? Weird. Then there's the logistics. People love the story of tens of thousands of workers dragging stones with ropes. And maybe that's partly true. But not for every block. Not for the granite beams weighing 50 to 80 tons, lifted over 100 feet in the air. That's not rope and manpower. That's engineering. That's planning. That's technique. And once you accept that the pyramid is much stranger than we usually admit, you start noticing even more bizarre details. For example, those narrow shafts leading out of the king's chamber and the queen's chamber. They're tiny, like the size of a vent, but they're aligned to specific points in the sky. No one knows exactly why. Astronomical alignment, ventilation, ritual pathways, some kind of calibration, and the fact that these tiny shafts were cut with such straightness and precision, it's unreal. People have stuck robots inside them and still haven't figured out what they were for. One of the shafts ends in a tiny limestone door with copper handles, like a door inside the pyramid where no one can reach it. Why would anyone build that? And this is the thought that keeps circling back in my head. The pyramid wasn't built like other Egyptian monuments. It doesn't follow their usual architectural style. It's like a black sheep, a one-off. Everything before and after is either simpler or different. It stands alone, like an outlier in history. And maybe that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just old, it's anomalously advanced. It doesn't behave like a structure that belongs strictly to its time period. And that's why every culture, every generation, keeps trying to interpret it. Because deep down, the Great Pyramid feels like a message written in stone. A message from people who knew something we don't, or mastered something we haven't rediscovered yet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's so much more to unpack. Theories, possibilities, things that don't add up, things that actually do make sense once you look at them in a certain way. And I want to break all of that down, piece by piece, without jumping into the wild or the supernatural. Just the real, documented, observable facts about this thing, and how those facts have puzzled engineers, architects, and scientists for generations. Because when you strip away the myths and the Hollywood nonsense, what you're left with is something far more intriguing, a structure built with intention, intelligence, and an understanding of engineering that seems to appear out of nowhere. It's like the pyramid represents a moment in history where someone, or some group, knew exactly what they were doing, and then that knowledge vanished. And the question is, how? What did they know? What did they use? How much have we lost? And why does this one building feel so deliberate? Let's dig into the mathematics, because this part is unbelievable. You take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 2, and somehow, it gives you almost exactly the polar radius of the Earth, scaled down, obviously. If you take the base perimeter and compare it to the height, you get something incredibly close to 2 pi. Like the structure is a giant stone model encoding the relationship between a circle and its radius. And look, maybe that's a coincidence. Maybe. But when the coincidences start stacking up like that, you start wondering whether someone intentionally encoded knowledge in the structure. It's like the pyramid is this massive multi-ton mathematical statement carved into stone, not something you share with casual building techniques or rough approximations. That's precision geometry, whatever the original motivations were. And remember, this isn't just about they were smart. Of course they were, but encoding precise planetary relationships, that's a whole different game. And let's talk about the casing stones. The pyramid originally had a smooth outer shell, highly polished white limestone that would have reflected sunlight like a mirror. Some people say it must have looked like a giant glowing beacon in the desert. Now imagine the skill required to shape and place those casing stones so tightly that you couldn't slip a piece of paper between them. This wasn't slapped together, it was executed intentionally with mastery. And yet today, we barely know how those casing stones were quarried, cut, transported, and fitted. We can guess, but we've never replicated it exactly at that scale. That's the weird thing about ancient structures. Modern reconstructions always involve cranes or modern tools just to speed things up. But the Egyptians didn't have that, at least not in the conventional story. Now let's talk about the interior structure again, because the Grand Gallery is one of the most visually striking architectural features in the ancient world. It's tall, it's narrow, it has this insane corbelled design where each layer of stone juts slightly inward. The effect is almost futuristic. You walk through it, and you feel like you're inside a spaceship or some sci-fi megastructure. And the reason it's so strange is because there's no other structure in Egypt built like this. Not before, not after. This style of construction doesn't appear anywhere else, as if someone tried something experimental, perfected it, and then nobody ever used the method again. That is bizarre. Cultures tend to repeat what works. Architectural styles evolve gradually. But the Great Pyramid is like a leap into another category of building entirely. Then you get to those air shafts, tiny precision-cut tunnels that connect the internal chambers to the outside. And if you've ever looked at the diagrams, the angles are so exact, it's crazy to think they were carved through thick layers of stone from the inside of the pyramid without GPS, without laser levels, without any modern surveying equipment. One of the shafts ends in a small limestone block with copper fittings, this little door that has no obvious reason to exist. It's like the pyramid is hiding compartments, not in a mystical way, but in a baffling engineering way. Now, when you start thinking about construction methods, the debates get heated. You've got the classic ramp theory, which basically says they used a giant ramp, but the ramp would have had to be massive, like miles long, requiring more material than the pyramid itself, and then it had to be torn down afterward, and there's no evidence of it. That alone makes you scratch your head. Other theories say they built it from the inside out with internal ramps. Some suggest they carved the limestone blocks directly out of the bedrock and dragged them upward using sleds wetted with water. And maybe that's all partly true, but those explanations rarely account for the granite. The granite is the big roadblock, literally and figuratively. Those blocks came from miles away, weighed dozens of tons, and were lifted high into the structure. No ramp theory neatly explains that without some serious logistical leaps. It's like the Egyptians had a construction mode they turned on only once in their history. This burst of advanced precision engineering, and then it disappeared. Later pyramids? They crumble. They crack. They fall apart. Some collapsed while they were still being built. That tells you something important. The builders of the Great Pyramid were operating at an elite level that the Egyptians themselves couldn't replicate consistently. So, you start wondering, what was special about that era? Who were the people that designed it? How were they trained? What tools did they have? Did they inherit techniques from an older tradition we don't know about anymore? Because there's a huge difference between saying Egyptians built it and understanding which Egyptians built it and what knowledge they had that didn't persist. And then comes the philosophical layer. Because yes, this is a technical puzzle, but it also taps into something deeper about human history. The Great Pyramid stands like a message from people who knew something we don't. It's a monument to a level of mastery that seems out of sync with its era. And that's why it fascinates us. It's not just old, it's anomalously advanced. It's a historical outlier that refuses to be explained neatly. Now think about the acoustics. People have tested the King's Chamber and the Grand Gallery, and they have weird resonant properties. Again, maybe it's an accident, maybe it's not. But when you stand in the Grand Gallery and speak, your voice sounds different. It echoes, amplifies, almost vibrates. That's not typical for stone corridors. The geometry is precise enough that it affects sound. And if you're a builder creating a functional interior, maybe for rituals, maybe for some sort of symbolic act, that makes sense. If you're building a tomb, maybe it doesn't. And that's the thing. Everything about the inside of the pyramid feels intentional, but not in the way tombs are. Tombs focus on art, written spells, religious iconography, statues, chambers with symbolic meanings. The Great Pyramid doesn't care about the symbolic. It cares about geometry, alignment, resonance, structure. It's more like a machine than a mausoleum. Now, I'm not saying it was a machine, but it was definitely engineered with a mindset that seems less commemorate a king and more achieve a specific purpose. Whether that purpose was spiritual, astronomical, ceremonial, or something we haven't thought of, who knows? But the design is so deliberate, you can't help but feel it wasn't just meant to look impressive. It was meant to do something. And then there's that odd fact that the Great Pyramid is almost perfectly oriented to the cardinal directions. But what really gets me is this. The alignment isn't just close. It's so spot on that if you built something today that large and tried to align it to true north, you'd need specialized equipment. But somehow, the ancient Egyptians achieved this nearly flawless alignment without magnetic compasses or satellites. And think about the long-term durability. Whatever they did worked. This thing is practically immortal. The casing stones were stripped off, the outer surface wore down, it endured thousands of years of earthquakes and storms, and still it stands. If you built something today with that much stone, it might last centuries. But 4.5 millennia? Standing almost unchanged? That's engineering mastery. So here's the question that sits in the back of my mind every time I think about the Great Pyramid. How much of human history have we lost? How many techniques, skills, or insights vanished because they weren't written down or because knowledge was passed from master to apprentice and then the line broke? The pyramid might be the last physical reminder of a level of craftsmanship we don't have anymore. And maybe that's why people keep arguing about it. Not because they want it to be aliens or something wild, but because we all sense that something about the Great Pyramid doesn't add up with the standard explanation. It feels like a puzzle we're supposed to solve, a challenge from the past, a reminder that human beings, ancient or modern, are capable of things that stretch the imagination. And honestly, that's the beauty of it. The Great Pyramid isn't just stone stacked on stone. It's ambition fossilized into architecture. It's a monument built by people who looked at the raw materials of the earth and said, we're going to make something that outlasts time itself. And they did. So when I think about the Great Pyramid, I don't see an ancient tomb. I see a question, a big one, a question that sits right at the intersection of engineering, history, mathematics, and human creativity. And the best part? It's a question we might never fully answer. But exploring it, digging into the mystery, peeling back the layers, that's the thrill. That's the adventure. And that's why, after all these years, the Great Pyramid still captures our imagination like almost nothing else on Earth. Because it stands there, enormous and silent, daring us to understand it. And no matter how much we learn, it always seems to be one step ahead.